Hmm. Hmm.
It is 9 o'clock in the morning in Chicago, and
Soraya said that she'll be on the phone. I'm not sure if actually this is her.
846. Who? 846.
Also be different for. Oh, here's another number coming in. I think she was having trouble accessing, but she might be able to access on the via phone.
okay.
I realized I can actually do it. I think I can invite participants.
Yeah. Okay. Back to Damon.
Okay, Afri, is Damon okay? Is he able to?
Not well. I'm trying to get him in.
I'm right here.
Now.
He's here.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Damon.
It might help if everyone goes to the grid view so you can see everybody.
All right.
Oh, now I see a shirt.
Yes, Damon. Very good. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning from Chicago. It is morning in Chicago, but in different parts of the world that we are joining from, it may be evening or afternoon. I know we have somebody from Sri Lanka right now. We have somebody from Ireland. Last time we had somebody from Germany and England and Nigeria. So this is a global conversation. I want to invite you first to make sure your audio is muted, but also be sure that your name shows up on the under the picture, just so we know who you are. And if you may tell us where you're from, so we know the global picture of this conversation. I want to say thank you to all of you for joining today. This is our second conversation. And some of you were here last time, and some of you are joining for the first time today. So I want to take a moment to say something about why we are doing what we are doing here. Omnia Institute for Contextual Leadership is a peace-building organization. Much of our work is in different parts of the world, Nigeria, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh in particular, where we build interfaith peacemaker teams with the idea that when people of different religions are able to come together, that they can work together to build peace in their communities. And together they are able to build a movement of people who can actually make change happen. This we are seeing in Nigeria and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh already. We have 71 such teams in Nigeria, and that's in the northeast where Boko Haram and situations like that are going on. In Sri Lanka, there are 20, and Bangladesh, there are 15. So it's a good number that we already have going in these locations. We are clear that something is happening that we've termed it for now the emerging new reality. Last time when we met, I gave you a quote from one of my favorite authors, Arundhati Roy from India. Arundhati Roy has a famous quote, but in the end of that quote, she says, "A new world is possible. In fact, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." I find that to be an inspirational thing. I don't know how you might feel about it, but when you look at it in the full context, it makes sense. This past 3 weeks or so, we have seen significant upheaval in the United States, where many young people of diverse racial makeups and cultures have come together to say no to police brutality and the organized or systemic racism that we've had in this country for a very, very long time. We are saying, in other words, that we are not going to tolerate this anymore, and that a new reality is possible, and in fact, we are working to get it done. That's what we have going on, and that same kind of feeling is there in the countries where we work as well. So we thought that we will convene this conversation in order to get a sense from you about what you think about that new reality. What are your perspectives? What are your ideas? And how do you come to that question? And so we created this conversation. It is a conversation. Like everything else that Omnia does, the inspiration for it comes from the ground, from below. And what that means is that we need to have you speak to that. Now, as you know, that there are a lot of people on this conversation, and it is going to be difficult to have everybody speak and cover it all in 1 hour. Therefore, I want to ask you, when you speak, to speak briefly, very briefly. If you want to elaborate on something, please do so on the chat. The chat feature. Use the chat feature quite as liberally as you want. I want to be sure to assure you that we will carefully review your chat feature as well as this recording in order to be sure that we catch all the nuance that you want to offer in this conversation. We begin today with two initiators. We have someone initiate, and then we get into the conversation. Cherisse Jackson and Damon Williams will initiate our conversation. They are from the Let Us Breathe collective, and they'll say a bit more about that. And then Afri Atiba will lead us or moderate our conversation following that. That conversation will probably go for a half an hour, maybe till about 5 minutes to the hour, at which point I will try to wrap up or summarize some of our conversation that's taken place already. And then I will look to welcome you for the next conversation in the next week. That's what I needed to say at this moment. Again, welcome. And I want to now invite Afri to please introduce our two initiators, Damon Williams and Cherisse Jackson. Sorry.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our conversation. I'd just like to start by saying that about 3 years ago, I was invited to a women's meeting, a women's conversation. And it was for Black women that wanted to have a conversation about their community, some things that they could do. And it was held at a place called the Breathing Room. And I didn't know anything about it, but it was in the neighborhood. It was on the South Side. And so I said, I'm going to go, because this sounds like this might be something that I'd be interested in. And so I ventured out to the Breathing Room for the first time in Chicago on 51st Street. And there, when I walked up and got out of my car, the first thing I saw was a rack of clothes and some shoes right on the sidewalk with a sign that said free stuff. I said, that's interesting. So I went in. And when I stepped inside of this big old building, I felt like I had stepped back in time. It reminded me of when I was a little girl and I went to a place called the Afro Arts Theater. It was a community center where I first learned African dance, and we did arts and crafts. I was so shocked. I looked to the left and there was a room full of clothes and shoes and jewelry and art, and it said, the Free Store. I was like, wow. It was the most interesting place I had seen in this time. At the time, I was teaching what I call a disruptive Bible study at my girlfriend's church. And we were looking for new ways to have church. So I was excited about this. And I was like, look at this. There was art, there were people, there were Black women, it was very inclusive. There was a sign that said how we should operate ourselves and how we should conduct ourselves in the center. And it was said everybody was welcome, and I felt very welcome. So I was so intrigued. And then I met Cherisse for the very first time. And I told her how excited I was. I participated in the meeting, and I said, I'm coming back. I'm coming back. I'm going to come back and join you guys. And when I did come back, that's when I met other young people. I met Cherisse. Again, I met Damon. And there's Damon smiling. And of course, his sister, Christiana, and many others. These young people, they were not only just talented and creative and artists and poets and writers, but they also had a vision. They had a radical vision. I was shocked, but it was a radical vision for the future. And so I'm excited that they're here. The two of them are here with us today, Cherisse and Damon. And I'm just gonna let them go ahead and share with us some of their visions that they have for the future. Radical, but interesting. So I think we're gonna start with Cherisse.
Good morning, y'all. Good to see y'all. Good to be here. Yeah, my involvement with the Let Us Breathe Collective came a little after a year after they were born. I'm not originally from Chicago. I'm from Texas, and so whenever I got here and I saw them for the first time, I was just as enthralled as Afri might have been. I definitely wanted to become more present in the movement with them. And I've since then I've been very politicized. Like, they've helped me shape my vision of what liberation work should be for me personally. But just to like give a little history, Damon might be able to give a little more history on the collective, but I can just give my perspective of it. He can fill in. The Let Us Breathe Collective is an alliance of artists and activists and organizers. We were born from the Ferguson uprisings of resistance, and we got started by first staging like confrontations, so direct actions and civil disobedience in Ferguson, and we wanted to bring that back to Chicago. And so upon coming back, we posted up in North Lawndale and did a few demonstrations there in remembrance of Rekia Boyd and opposition to Homan Square. And then we were given a building. We got a building in the back of the yard. So we're here at the Breathing Room space now, and it's a arts and healing and organizing hub where we are trying to reimagine our world without police, prisons, and other oppressive systems. And so like my role here has basically been to figure out how to like sustain our bodies and sustain our spaces of liberation. And so like I've just been helping shape our food program. We just entered our second year of having our own garden space. And so we're just trying to expand that and figure out how to share that with the community more, have more community engagement around it. And yet, like with the recent uprisings, it's just been opening up way more opportunities that I could ever imagine for the garden. So I'm kind of excited for that.
Yeah, I feel like you guys were not before your time, but right on time. And then you fell right into all of this. So, so Damon, how do you fit into this big picture?
So yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Damon Williams, one of the co-founders and part of the Let Us Breathe Collective. And I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation, not only because I'm grateful to be part of any conversation if people want to talk about the structural violence that destroys our communities. It is probably my deepest passion, but particularly in this space where we can talk about it on a global, baby, on a global scale, I'm sorry about that. Because policing, so just to be clear, like Afri said, we have this vision. We are talking about abolishing carceral militarism. Domestically, that looks like police and prisons, but on a global scale, militarism at large. And so we frame that within the conversation of abolition. So I just want to uplift Cherisse, right? Because for a lot of people, abolition feels cartoonish or just theoretical. But Cherisse really grounds us in the work that she brings and contributes to the space, because a way to just make it simple, abolition is a world where everyone has something to do, right? And the world that we live in now is a world where everyone has access to being incarcerated. And so just using the resources to shift that paradigm. And so, folks can throw questions in the chat. I feel like, I'm sorry, I missed a little bit of the pre-meeting. I feel like we got 15 minutes before I pass it back over to Afri to kind of facilitate for 30 minutes, right?
We have 5.
Yes.
5 minutes, 5 more minutes. Okay, it's cool. So let me direct, right? And so yes, what we are naming is that the modern police system in the United States is birthed out of the Patrol of Chattel Slavery and the Fugitive Slave Act. Police did not exist in America before catching slaves, and structurally and systematically, they still continue towards that impact and towards that effect. Also, that our 13th Amendment, after the ending of the American Civil War in 1865, that passed the 13th Amendment that says slavery shall not exist in the United States, comma, except for punishment of a crime. And that is still the law of our land today. So what it means is any criminalization or any investment into punishing crime, and through our system, we call those felonies, folks are then subjected to a legally set up modern slave system. It's not a metaphor, it's not an analogy, it is the actual reality of our political economy. And so what we push for and what these moments of uprising represent is an organic grassroots response that, I name as anti-violent. A lot of the news wants to describe what happens as chaotic and as violent, and I challenge that. And as a place that is grounded in peace, right? I think it is important that from my perspective, I believe anti-violence and the work and the struggle for peace is an active project, right? Like it is not a passive and it's not interpersonal. It is collective and it is structural. And so what we've seen over these last few years that connects to the last few decades, which connects to the last few centuries, is that there becomes a point where oppressed people rise up. And in our modern history, we see that the targets of that rising up is usually property and capital, because our economic system is so inherently inequitable that folks do not have the resources to survive and do not have the resources to live in health and to live in peace. And that actually produces and creates more conflict and creates violence. And what we kind of push is that the investment into cages, the investment into guns, the investment into handcuffs, the investment into planes, the investment into fighter bombs and jets and poisons and tear gas and surveillance is an investment into violence. And so to be responding to harm and violence on a communal level that is a product of structural and state violence with more structural and state violence, with the same system, the same tear gas canisters that you find in Palestine, you'll find in St. Louis, and you'll find in Chicago. We need to understand that it's not about making this system better, and it's not about just reducing the harm of the system. We have to create a new reality and a new form of human relationship. So similarly to how we know that fossil fuels are destroying our environment and destroying our ability to produce food and to breathe healthy air and to maintain our water systems, I believe that militarism is destroying our society. And so the way we're like, we need Green New Deals, or we need to be 100% renewable in 20, 30 years, right? Like we need to be saying right now, we need to stop governing through militarism and through violence and figure out new democratic ways to distribute resources, make decisions, and respond to harm, conflict, and lack that we experience for more healthy, restorative, transformative ways. So for us, that looks like art, that looks like political movement, that looks like civic engagement, that looks a lot like education and community building, but then it looks like in these big moments connecting the dots. So from Chicago to Minneapolis, from Minneapolis to St. Louis to Baltimore, to Los Angeles, to Florida, to Ireland, to Sri Lanka, to Israel, to Palestine, to South Africa, right? Like we need to be talking about these at the local, federal, national, and global level in all of our spaces, and know that it's really just about building new human connections and human relationships.
Thank you. Interesting. And though it sounds radical, it also sounds doable when you put it into very simplistic things that we can do. Education, just getting rid of certain things that we don't need in our economy.
In the United States, we don't have a healthcare system. We have more vacant homes than we do homeless people. We throw away more food than it would take to cure starvation. And all of the money that we invest into militarism could, in 1 year, could fix those things almost forever. And so, yeah, just that. I'm sorry, I get excited.
Good. We want you to be excited. The floor is open. The floor is open for conversation. What would you like to add to this, or ask Damon or Cherisse?
Let me suggest to everybody, there is a feature called Raise Your Hand. If you do that, your name will come to the top of our participant list. It's if you go to the participants, you will see that you can do it with. You can do it there, I believe.
I don't.
If not, just raise your hand, and as we see it, we'll take it. We'll take you. Remember, it's a conversation. You may ask questions from Damon or Cherisse, but understand that what we want to do is to hear from you about the initiative, the initiation of the conversation that Damon and Cherisse have brought to us.
Very quiet. So,
So
Cherisse.
are we still answering like around those 4 questions? Like,
Let me rephrase. Let me make sure that everybody remembers the 4 questions that we've started off with. First is that we are looking at we are asking what is the nature of the emerging new reality. Damon pointed out to a variety of items that can go to make up that new reality, and I'm very grateful for that, for doing that in such a short time. Secondly, what are the values of that new reality? Third, what problems will it solve? What common problems that we have will it solve? And fourth, what is Omnia's unique role in bringing about that new reality?
Okay, I see that Stephen's hand is up. Stephen.
Hello, everyone. So the question that I that I would have to Damon would be one of the things. So I'm in the United States. I'm in Iowa right now. But one of the things that I think kind of limits people's ability to kind of maybe get behind this ideology is the fact that they might not have seen it work, or they think that it might be chaos. Is there any countries or different places that has implemented a less punitive system in their society, and what was the result of that, and how have they been able to sustain working without police in the punitive system?
Yeah, so great question. There's a lot of ways to answer that. One, I also went to college in Iowa. I dealt with police in Iowa. I was referred to as a stupid nigger by police in Iowa. So word, just love and solidarity on that experience. It's whack out there. And so to the question of tangible examples. So one, first, just before I even speak humbly, right? Like the 2, I think, most prolific, most important thinkers in the country, and that I would probably argue for the world, would be one woman named Miriam Kaba, who did a lot of organizing in Chicago, is based out of New York, lives back there. With like about a week ago, she had an op-ed in the New York Times that said, yes, we literally mean abolish the police. It's only like 500 to 1,000 words or something like that. It's very brief and very succinct. The other is Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, who's based out of California. And if you just look at those 2 people's work, Google everything they've ever said, every speech they've done, read their books that they've published, you will be informed and be at close to the same level that I am. So just resources to direct folks to. And in that, I borrowed from Miriam Kaba of saying, first, in the United States, the most technologically advanced and militarized society that we've ever seen, it will not be a one-to-one, right? It's not, hey, let's close this building and open up another building. What we're actually talking about is reorganizing our society and creating a new institutional framework. And I can talk about that in our context a little bit, but I heard the question asking for examples in other places. And yes, throughout the global South, or throughout South America and throughout Africa, there are plenty of communities that may not be well resourced, but live closer to like more ancestral or indigenous practices, and have communal councils and do not have police forces. One example would be Palenque in Colombia. We had an artistic group called Combalisi Me, who was traveling the United States, and they came to the breathing room, and they live in the first, I want to say it exactly, the first space in the Western Hemisphere liberated by enslaved Black people. So it's a Black Afro Latinx space in Colombia, and they, it is not a highly developed in terms of industrial capital space, but they live without a police system. And there are hundreds of examples throughout the world. And then I'll also say human beings have existed for 250,000 years, and these systems are about 200, 250 years old. So we have archaeological and like ancestral evidence of we can coexist. We just now have more harmful technologies, right? Like more people have access to weapons. And so we have to figure out how to respond to that. So that's what I would do is first, I always push people towards the global South, but it will not be a one-to-one parallel. It just helps prove that it's possible on a human level. But then in the United States, I believe like it starts with first having institutions that make sure that every community within walking distance can guarantee housing, can guarantee access to food and nutrition, and guarantee access to medicine. If we have institutions that are maintaining survival, I think one, you will have more development, you will create healthier people, and you would just reduce and prevent conflict in the first place. And then within those institutions, you would then create relationships for accountability, for response, for restoration. So the idea of there being one person who nobody knows, who's foreign to a community, whose only power is state authority and the fact that they have a gun on their hip, who responds to domestic violence, who responds to a mental health episode, who responds to burglary, who responds to a fight between cousins at a barbecue, who, you know, like, who responds to what's happening at a store, who's stopping you in traffic, right? Basically what we're saying is state authorized violence is then the solution. And what we're saying is humanity and communal relationships is actually the solution. So it looks like having a multitude of spaces and then figuring out new responses when harm happens, but actually creating an environment where harm is not the norm.
It seems to me that fear would be a big factor in that, but people fear the other. And how do we deal with that? Before we can even get to that level, people are so afraid. This race is afraid of that race, and that race is afraid of this race. And so somehow we would have to get on some type of level that we would trust and love each other. But let me call on Merwin to speak. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Mervyn DeMello. Shanta knows me. And I also helped at Scoop once upon a time, and then later on at Omnia in the very initial period. So this is so wonderful to see all of this coming together and all the power and solidarity with Omnia to people like you, Afri. What I wanted to say, in several countries that I've lived in, we live in more a communitarian way. I'm Kenyan, born of Indian origin, and lived in Bangladesh most recently. And I'm wondering, so for a while, I lived in the back of the yards in Chicago. So I know Cherisse, and I know of Damon, although I've never met you. It's really wonderful to meet you and see you in person, to be inspired by what you were saying. In Chicago, in the back of the yards, one of my, I would say, what I was actively doing was trying to bring communities together. I lived at a Catholic worker institution called Sukasa. I was working at a restorative justice hub called the Precious Blood Ministries for Reconciliation. And I visited the youth detention center, and I was trying to bring churches and various kinds of communities working with different ethnic groups or different nationalities, like the Latino people, the African-American people, or these different little small communities. What I believe is critical is the connecting of communities that are like-minded and that can then share resources. So I'm wondering, in order to address the bigger picture, would one of the values that Omnia can promote is just that, connections and sharing of resources, and breaking the stereotypes of exactly what you referred to, Afri. We live in, I think, in very sheltered hubs. I'm not referring to people who are oppressed. I'm referring to others for our own comfort. And we need to break that stereotype, particularly here in this country. And I'm saying it a little bit with an outsider's perspective of how I've lived in other countries and what I see here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? I think someone, Damon, wanted the author of.
I saw in the chat that people wrote it out.
Did you write it out?
It looks like it's there in the chat.
Okay.
Also, there's a comment from Rebecca that is from earlier that was like, what are ideas for first steps you want to see from folks?
Okay. And Cherisse, I'm good. You can hop in whenever you want. Just to let you know. So, but no pressure. So yeah, first steps is very relative. It depends on where you're at and where you're experiencing. So I also want to be humble of, I'm 27 years old, so there may be people on this call that's been doing work longer than I've been alive. And so I, just want to be careful in like prescribing first steps to anybody. So I think there's like something I already named of like what should be our collective priority of like on a structural level, not just person to person, not just through charity models, but through our political economy and through community building, working to create a reality where we guarantee housing, food, and medicine, healthcare. I know that those resources are accessible for different people in different places of the world, but I believe those are the three things you need to survive for many people on a daily basis. And if we don't have that, we cannot expect people to be better, right? Like, you can't expect someone who has not had a place to sleep or has not eaten in 72 hours to be able to like transform their contradictions or to be able to intervene into all of the violence that we experience, right? So that does feel very primary. But then on the work that we do, you know, I come from an organizing tradition. I would probably uplift Ella Baker's legacy as the legacy that I, you know, attempt to uphold. So that really just means building bodies with your people. It means taking time to decide and make collective decisions. And within that, I think, you know, all of us just globally need to educate ourselves on the history of racism, violence, imperialism, incarceration, and particularly through the lens of anti-Blackness, because there is more or less not a place in the developed world, or not even developed, I was about to curse, that's like a BS term, that doesn't mean anything. There's not really a place in the world where anti-Blackness is not prominent and not structured and instituted into not only state spaces, but communal spaces. And so, you know, all people are affected by this violence, but the system was created in many ways by what happened to the African continent and to our diaspora of people that have been spread out throughout the world. So wherever you are, making sure that you are understanding that and understanding your position to this effort, and then just accounting for your position. So me, even as a Black man in the United States of America, I have to be accountable to my position around patriarchy, gender violence, transphobia, cisphobia, homophobia, right? Or cis heteronormativity and homophobia. And so that means I need to get Black men in a circle, and we need to read books, or we need to look at YouTube videos, or we need to have conversations, or we need to heal. And then we need to take action and then intervene and put our body on the line and redistribute our resources. And so, you know, figuring out how to do that and who your people are, who you have trust with, building trust, building relationships. And then also militarism is happening everywhere. And particularly, you know, there are two ways I think you can support Black people in America. Is one, helping us understand ways we need to oppose the U.S. empire in other spaces. We don't even know where we have all these military bases and where we have all these activities. And people usually outside the United States have a much greater knowledge of the impact of the United States than we do. But then also from wherever you are, shaming, naming that Western Europe and the United States are harming their people. So the apartheid in South Africa did not end until there was global pressure. Jim Crow in America did not end until it was in America's geopolitical interest to do different or to do somewhat better. And so this thing cannot be disjointed. So wherever you are, build with your people, and then pressure America abroad, and then send abroad pressure here. Cherisse, you have anything else on like more grounded to the earth? How to like start?
Yeah, because the question was asked like, what are the first steps? And I think like those steps have already been taken, or like they've begun even prior to like the uprising. And so like it's, for me, it's always been like that we can take care of ourselves, that we just needed to be empowered to do so. And so yeah, before the uprising, I was feeling what Merwin was saying. It's like there's these programs, there's these buildings in the back of the yards that are already been doing the work, and that those probably need to be amplified, because now like we've been talking about abolishing the police for a while now, and it seems like that might be a reality sooner than we thought. And so my mind has just been on like, okay, so what's next? Like what needs to be done? And if the idea of police being obsolete is coming sooner than we think, and it seems like there's these very separated entities like doing the work, and I'm just trying to figure out like how to sustain them and then make them more connected. Because like even on this campus, yeah, we have Sukasa, we have Breathing Room, and we have Frida's Place, which is a soup kitchen that's all on the same block. And I just feel like we can just like amplify each other's visions if there was just more connection and a relationship building. So like for me, the first step is just like get to know your neighbors, building those connections, seeing how like our visions align, and how like we can switch them around or just tweak them, bits and pieces of it to make it more cohesive. Yeah, I'm like right now on the grounds for me, I just want to figure out how we can amplify the things that, because like at Precious Blood, they already have like an alternative to calling the police. And not a lot of people know that. Like I didn't even know about it until a few weeks ago when I seen them in the streets and they had their little vests on, and I'm like, yo, what's going on? And they're like, we're the Institute of Nonviolence. And, you know, like when I had heard of them, and through my ignorance, I just like assumed that it was a body of white people that were facilitating it. But, you know, it was people that lived in the neighborhood and that they were trained. They had trained themselves on how to de-escalate situations in the back of the yards. And so they would tell the folks, like, if something is happening, here's our card, this is our name, like, call us and we'll be there. And so just like I want to figure out how we amplify those entities, like those groups, because I think that those are the solutions. And then, like, just even though like everybody might have a different vision for how the liberation work looks, like everybody needs to be in the same room at some point. So I think that Omnia is playing their role that they need to, is because they're bringing all these different perspectives into the same table, because like the diversity makes it much more possible for us to come up with a more fortified solution. And yeah, I'm like, that's what I'm seeing emerging, is like these mutual aid efforts, although it seems like they're kind of being sustained through white guilt at the time for the time being. I want to figure out how to like sustain past that period and make it like a something that can like last for a really long time.
And I'll be succinct on this one. I'm sorry, y'all. I know I'm long-winded. But to Marwan's point, what's up, Marwan? I remember you. Good to hear from you again. About making connection and building community, particularly here in the United States, or my understanding of the Western world. I don't want to speak for like other contexts. But one thing I think, particularly for faith-based spaces to challenge people or to nurture people on, is the impact of individualism as a philosophy. So that's where we can do some real philosophical and spiritual work, because, you know, most readings of like Western Bibles, right, are analyzed through this notion of the individual, which is then also how, like, through the Enlightenment, through, you know, how America was founded, literally. And I don't uphold that. I think that is actually an anti-African concept. And so I just want to uphold that we need to be communal and collective in every space. So individual, like in terms of its etymology and definition, means one divided from a group or from a whole, separate. And I don't believe that is the human reality. And so really just like uplifting interconnectedness, which I think y'all probably have from assumption, just like more experience and value in that. So I just want to lean into that, right? Like the fight against police killing Black people in the street is the fight towards, or the work towards, making sure people cast off this notion of the individual and see themselves as a unique, special, beautiful, one-of-a-kind person that is connected to a whole and connected to life at large. And if people don't see that, we will stay in these silos, and we can have all the solutions. Because really, you know, people ask for solutions all the time. They're not too hard to find. We have them. They're actually not that complicated. It's really just taking care of people. We can programatize and organize that. But like, if you see what you think of as a loving mother, that is basically what we need to do for all people. And so just figure out how to do that with organization. But I don't think people can get to that place if they see themselves as like, I am only me, and it's only me and my little household and our plot of land, and that's someone else different from me over there. Without that, we will continue to be in this corrosive environment.
Thank you, Damon. Afri, I wanted to point out that Paul Sutherland has his hand up for a little while.
Okay. I saw him and then he disappeared. But go ahead, Paul, and then Steve, or Steven.
Steven.
Paul. Yeah, I thought that I couldn't find him anymore.
I find him now either. So, okay, Steven.
Yeah. Go ahead, Steven, then.
Hello again. Thank you all for this. I've learned a great deal. I have a question specifically for Cherisse. So with the work that you all do as far as at the Let Us Breathe Collective, how have you all incorporated art into the work that you are doing, and how have you all seen that work as a healing space for people who have experienced these traumatic events that you are speaking about?
Awesome.
Yes, so I don't know. Well, so prior to the uprisings, we've held political education, like open mics, and that we call them Breathing Room series. That's our flagship event that we would host like every other month. We need to have one again soon. I don't know what that's gonna look like, but we would just invite folks out to get free food. We have our free store open, and a few folks, some groups, organizations, local organizations would come and just like politically educate the community. And then we would open the floor for the rappers, the poets, and whoever else has something to share to just like do an open mic portion of that. And 2 years ago, like 2 summers ago, we had free art classes through Envisioning Justice, where we were basically just like implementing our mission and our vision to envision a world without police and prisons. And so we had a class where we did our mural on our brick wall, and we had a culinary arts class where we were teaching folks about urban agriculture and like a seed to plate concept. So like just inviting young folks or the community out to gardens that were in the back of the yards, and then like showing them how to grow it, and then showing them like how it can benefit their bodies, and then how they can like be artful with it, plating it. Yeah, like we've had those free art classes. We also had like writing class. I know that Damon's been working on a free sessions, which is like a studio production program that he could maybe speak more on. And the way that I see it impact the community is that it activates their mind more creatively to think outside the box and think of like new solutions to like what their liberation can look like. Because a lot of people that come into this building, they're just including myself, they're just in awe of like what could be. It's like that we've been so conditioned that we thought that this is all that it could be, but it like the possibilities are endless. Like, and so like that's how I was impacted, and that's what I've been seeing how the community has been impacted as well.
Efri, I want to direct the conversation a little bit by asking Damon a specific question, if that's okay. Damon, this weekend, 104 people were shot in Chicago. 14 people were fatally shot, and some of it in the South Side, where you all have the breathing room. How shall we speak about doing away with police, or how shall we speak about reconfiguring police in the context of such large amount of violence that's going on right in our neighborhood? What do you think about it?
Absolutely. That's I want to like account for myself, because I am excited to respond to that, and I smile even though it's like deep tragedy and traumatic and horrific. So yeah, I just want to like reground myself in the human loss, because I think that's also part of the problem, how the violence in Chicago gets processed, as it gets talked about, is like it's as if it's like sports statistics. And so we look at weekends and we look at numbers, and oftentimes we don't know who those people are, what those conflicts were about, and therefore have no solutions, and just then say we need a military. So that's my first point, is that it is human conflict and not a military conflict. And so police are domestic militaries. And so having a foreign or state-sanctioned military to come into a neighborhood that they have no relationship with, they are not equipped, even with the best desires. But just to kind of like pull out some of the political analysis. One, I think folks, particularly who are not in this country, but everybody in the United States should know, unless things have changed in the last year or so, Chicago has the most police per capita of any major city in the United States. And so the argument is usually there is violence and we need more police. And if that logic actually was supported by evidence, then Chicago should be the safest place or the most peaceful place. My proposition is it is the investment into the police department. 40% of our budget, so that means $2 out of every $5 is going to policing. Just the budget. That does not actually include some extra expenditures. So it's about 40 to 42% of our resources. And so I am saying that creates the conflict, that creates the disparity, that creates the shortage of housing and resources. And so it is, what I hear is the results of state violence are that there are all these shootings, and usually the response is we need more state violence. We need to bring more of the cause that brought these terrible results. And so I want to also push that Chicago gets named and framed in a very specific way. So for the last 6 to 10 years, there's been this push, this organized push of, hey, policing is anti-Black oppressive violence, and we need a new system. And the response is always from a conservative standpoint, but what about Chicago? Chicago exists, so therefore we need more police. And so I just want to let folks know we have plenty of police here. They are failing. That is the point that we are making. And so in terms of how do we address the violence, if we defund $2 billion by 75% immediately, that's $1.5 billion. And so even before we build programs, before we build new buildings, just taking those resources and investing in these very concentrated areas, right? Like if we just drew a map of where these shootings are happening, they're concentrated within a few blocks, within a few pockets, and there has never been an attempt to have a full investment into those people, into those spaces. It always gets cycled through, how do we invest more in business? How do we invest more in downtown? How do we have more retail? While schools are being closed, right? So we had the most school closings in the last 10 years of any city in America, right? And so that creates violence. Our public housing system over the last 20 years has been destroyed, and then there was no system to replace it. That creates violence. And we know what's happening in our healthcare system. It is a global embarrassment what the United States is doing to its people in terms of hoarding and keeping away resources to keep people alive. And so I say that creates a mental health issue, right? All violence that I know of has some relationship to mental health as I define it. I don't think healthy people go out and try to hurt another body. That is something of sickness. And so what is needed is healing. And the police do not do that. I believe that they create a greater trauma. And I also would argue that most of the people that are involved in those shootings have already had police and prison interaction. And it is actually that involvement that gets folks into a more violent space. And so these are not just babies born out the womb with guns. These are babies who are living in terrible conditions and then put into warehouses, put into cages. And then also the handgun industry. So let's talk structurally again. Right? The guns that are being produced all over the world, the United States government, through its police departments and through its military, add up to 40% of that revenue, right? So there wouldn't even be guns in the first place if we didn't invest into making sure that all of our cities had thousands and thousands and thousands of armed people. And so there wouldn't even be the factories, there wouldn't even be the economies of scale if we as a public and we as a global society did not invest in so much into weaponized militarism. And so my argument is more guns is not going to stop the shooting. We actually need to heal these people. And most of the shooting, it's concentrated in a young age group. So we're talking about 16 to 24-year-olds. So just think about 16 to 24-year-olds wherever you are in the world and what it would take to put them in a position where they want to shoot somebody, and what should be done to prevent that and what should be done to respond to that. And again, I say that those are not complex solutions. Those are pretty simple human things. But I argue that it is because it is young, Black, poor Black people specifically. So there's a lot of middle class, there's a lot of established, there's a lot of privileged Black people who invest in this system and who betray our communities and say, arrest those kids. And it is a shirking of responsibility. So what I say is, don't go get an army, get our community to be more responsible and to be more collective. And that is the solution, the way it is anywhere else in the world.
Thank you.
Amen. Any responses? I like that.
I'm trying to switch to my phone because I got to head to a press conference, but I want to make sure I'm still here and present.
And actually, this gives me an opportunity to say, if there are several quick responses, let's take them.
Mm-hmm.
The next 5 minutes or so, we need to go to the to wrapping up activity.
And I'll just note that there are a number of comments that maybe could be read or something. Whatever the moderators want to do, I just want to note that they're there.
There were several comments. I'm gonna say.
Start reading them. Is there
Even again though, but and David in Canada spoke about Costa Rica, and he says they have no national military, and it could be a good example to follow. Interesting. Still there? Did you want to say something about that? Okay.
This is David from Canada on the West Coast in British Columbia, almost straight north from Costa Rica. I don't have any personal experience of the non-military dimension of Costa Rica, but I do know that they have a University of Peace established in San Jose. And I think we don't hear much news of violence coming out of Costa Rica, in part because they don't have a military focus of their national identity. I also think that I've heard that Finland has a much more humane approach to their penal system and their jails. And they believe that those that are being punished for crimes need to come out as human beings, not as bigger criminal elements in the community. I'm also involved with the Royal Commonwealth Society, and I think the network of Commonwealth of Nations, 54 of them, can contribute to some of the direction that Omnia is going, with integrity and dignity and respect and understanding of the other. That's my 49 seconds of contribution.
Thank
you for including me.
Is Paul back? Paul had his hand up and he's back. Okay, go right ahead.
Yes, I would just like to ask Cherisse and Damon whether you have any concrete suggestions, ideas on how Omnia can help you in your work. You know that you're acquainted with Omnia's interfaith peace teams. Is something like that serviceable for the work that you are doing there on the streets, on the ground? How can Omnia help you?
Like I said earlier, I really do think that Omnia is playing a role right now. I guess like one of the points of us being here is to have younger voices in the conversation, and it's just like I would like to see Omnia bridge that gap of the intergeneration, like, because there is a huge gap. Like there's these conversations been had with baby boomers, and there's a conversation being had with the our generation, and like I think merging those two together would be like this wonderful thing. Like solutions would just start coming out of nowhere, because we're both like there's things being done in different entities, different parts of the world. It's just like bridging that gap. And so like maybe finding a way to connect with the other Let Us Breathe of the nation of the world, and just like bringing them to this table right here. That would be helpful. Like these conversations are helpful for me, because it like expands my thoughts on like what liberation could actually look like for us. So yeah, I think that Omnia is playing the role they need to. Maybe it just needs to expand, just bring more people together. Diversity.
Thank you.
All right. Hand up.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Damon.
And yeah, and I could also add that if folks are in traveling distance to Chicago, following us on social media, we're about to be putting out a lot more calls of how people can get involved and support. And then it's weird because we have a weird relationship with money, and we're trying to get off of that system. But there also is a lot of programming that we're trying to build. And so one program particularly that we need access to people on is a free mental health services. And I think that would be really valuable. So if folks, particularly folks who are prepared to like move outside of the traditional institutional, I'm sorry, I'm moving around, the traditional institutional framework of the metal industrial complex. So an access to healers and care workers and folks that can offer counsel. And if folks want to, give monetary donations, we are not asking, but we will humbly receive via Cash App and PayPal. So that's Cash App, Let Us Breathe, and then Let Us Breathe 2015 at Gmail on PayPal. If folks feel inclined to contribute financially, but really what we need is people to help us build up some of these programs. Cherisse definitely always needs support in our agriculture to culinary arts work. And then also folks who want to learn, because really one of our goals is to be global and to be able to be in network with spaces like Breathing Room and like Let Us Breathe all over the world. And in order to do that, we need to know where those spaces are. So letting folks know that we exist, letting us know about other spaces that exist, you can help us really travel to some of these other spaces, to be able to teach, to be able to cook, to be able to perform, and to be able to learn what's happening around the world and strengthen our analysis. So that would be really, really helpful.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you. I'm going to shift now because it's 5 minutes to 10 o'clock. Thank you. I appreciate your moderating during this time. I just noticed that Soraya had her hand up for a bit. If you have a comment, would you make that? And then I'll begin to wrap up.
Yeah, quickly. Thank you, Shanta. My question to Cherisse and Damon is, how many people in the Black community today, particularly in Chicago, have woken up with vigor that I am going to do something about this? And that is what we at Omnia teach people. There are huge problems, but there are little issues that every community can resolve. So we train people on how to identify those issues. So how many people do you think are energized and excited to do something different, to reorganize their communities?
Yeah, I don't know if I could put a number on how many people there are, but I have seen like a surge of, especially in the back of the yards, and especially whenever we are activating like our mutual aid efforts, that they will come out and ask like what's going on and that they want to be participating in the mutual aid. It's a surge of folks. And so like, I personally want to keep up with that momentum. I want to keep like riding that way because like it's exactly what we need. Like I truly believe that we are the answer. Like we're the solutions to our problems. So
you do see a surge, Cherisse? You do see a surge? You do see a surge? Fantastic.
That's what I've been noticing.
So we must harness that, right?
Right. Yeah. I definitely want to keep riding that wave. I'm just trying to figure out how to make it sustainable because like people could just keep doing this work and then like burn out easily. And so I'm just like, how do we make it to where people don't get into that burnout mode and that they stay motivated and engaged with it. And so I think like just that, then that's when the relationship building comes in because we really need to figure out what everybody's gifts and their skill sets are and like how they can best contribute to the community. Because if they're just doing some stuff just because and not because like that's truly what they're passionate about, that's when the burnout comes in. So I not only want to like harness all that human capacity, that human power, I want to like figure out what it is that you're passionate about that brought you to this space to do this work.
Thank you very much.
And can I just, I know we had 1 minute just to respond to that question. So just to let folks know, like in the United States, but I think we can also calculate globally. I'm sorry. I'm trying to raise this one up. There has never been as much political activity as happened right now. So all 50 states at one time had some type of protest action or were participated in what we are naming as an uprising. And that has never happened in human history. And then also in Chicago, right, the push to defund the police or for abolition, over the last few years, it felt like a few dozen people. But on the apex, the day of May 30th, when we went downtown, there were tens of thousands. And so that happens, right? Like people get excited. There's like a collective moment or collective spark that triggers explosions of activity and energy. But to work that definitely is tied into the pandemic. So there was already a mutual aid infrastructure and energy really picking up heavy in the city. And so after the response, after some buildings were burned, after some people weren't able to access grocery stores or pharmacies, we saw a really robust community-driven mutual aid effort. So we've been doing that work for about 5 or so years now, but we're seeing all over the city in parks, in front of schools, in front of churches, people setting up and doing exactly what we're saying is our abolitionist reality, right? Like giving people the resources they need because they need it and giving it for free. So we're seeing people give away clothes, food, books, the things we were trying to do by ourselves. We just see it happening everywhere, and it didn't need us to send out an email or a press release to happen. So it is really a very, very exciting and invigorating time.
Thank you very much, Cherisse and Damon. Thank you for all your comments. And congratulations on what you all are doing at the Breathing Room Collective. It sounds tremendously valuable. And I look forward to participating with you all more fully. I want to take a moment to quickly wrap up our conversation. It is very hard to wrap this up because there are so many conversations or so many big ideas that were out there. Many of you have written in the group chat, and I will be sure to take note of those. I will write notes from this conversation and post both the video, the recording of this video, and notes from the chats and so on in our Google Drive, and send you a link. You should also know that I think we are on Facebook Live today. So if that is in fact the case, last time it didn't work, if that is in fact the case, there will be a recording of this on Facebook on Omnia's page, Omnia Institute for Contextual Leadership. I want to say just one thing here, and that is that what we heard today were two very important but different perspectives. From Cherisse, what we have is more of a community building arts, bringing arts together. She herself is a culinary artist. How do you create healing spaces? How do you build the community? That kind of idea, which is, I think, a very important part of what we are talking about. From Damon, we heard a very incisive critique of the military-industrial complex and police that are a part of it, and the militarism that's a part, that's a remaining vestiges from the slavery period, and how that is still going on and really creating violence against our communities. And the need for grassroots response to that, and Breathing Room obviously is one of those opportunities for us to do that. I want to thank you for the many observations that were made about both the incisive critique that we need to bring to that, the values that we are looking for in the new reality, but also many suggestions about what Omnia can do in bringing about this new reality. Again, it's too much to wrap up in this next minute or so. Therefore, I won't even attempt to do more than that at the moment. I'm going to write up these notes and send it to you. And I want to invite you to write notes on that, because it'll be a Google document. So you can write your own notes as well. I want to say thank you again to both these young people. I think we can call them young people.
Yes, they are young people.
Many of us now. Yes, indeed. Give them a clap. Yes, and for the incredible energy that they bring and the power of their vision. I'm very grateful for that, and we look forward to working together with you. Next Tuesday we will meet again. I understand for some of you or some people who are not on the call today, last week's registration link didn't work. I've had several emails about that. I expected that to work, and apparently it didn't. So may I suggest that you go back and re-register, just in case there's going to be a problem on Tuesday. I'm going to send you that registration link in my next email. Next week, we will have stories and perspective from different parts of the world. I am hoping to hear from folks from Nigeria to begin with, and hear what they are experiencing in terms of the breathing room that they have in order to live their lives in peace and justice. That's it for today. Thank you very much for participating. Please let others know about this conversation and invite them to participate as well. For all of you who came in from different parts of the world, particularly, thank you very much. And particularly thank you to Cherisse and Damon and Afri and Saraya and Benjamin for helping me manage this time. Thank you very much. Have a good day and good night. Bye-bye.
Right. Good day.
Satya Seelan was quiet.
Yeah, man. Muted. Soraya, let's come back together with Afri to chat for a bit. Did you hear? Okay, very good. I'm going to end this meeting. Damon, thank you.
What time do you want to come back, Shant? I have another call. Is it possible to do it a little later? You also have your call now.
That's at 11 in about an hour. So,
okay,
yeah, let's do it in the afternoon then.
Okay, please.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for your for that
you.
input, Soraya, about the Muslim situation. So.
Of course. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.